Hi, my name is Dr. Daniel Fox, and I'm a licensed psychologist, and I specialize in the area of personality disorders. And today, we're going to talk about what's called the War of the Roses. And this is that couple that is made up of one individual who has borderline personality disorder or traits, and the other individual tends to have a narcissistic personality disorder and or traits. So when they come together, this couple can be referred to as War of the Roses. And that is because of something that is so sweet but so contentious. And so what we're going to do today, we're going to talk a little bit about what draws these folks to each other, as well as how to manage it, maybe how to deal with it, and some techniques to maybe improve the relationship if you're in one of these types of relationships, or maybe you're a mental health provider trying to work with this type of couple. So let's first start with the borderline personality disorder individual. And what is attractive about them is their tendency to be very vivacious, attractive, very exciting, sort of that carefree type of attitude. And that is a big draw for the narcissistic personality disordered individual, as well as that tendency that they're very giving. A lot of individuals that are borderline personality are very giving. They give of themselves, they'll give of material things, and initially that this is a big draw because your narcissistic individual wants to take that. So they want to take a lot of things, and they are very attractive to the individual that has borderline personality disorder, because they are seen as as appearing strong, very confident, as well as knowing what they want, extremely passionate at the start of the relationship, and they are also sort of very generous as well, so they're very giving. So this relationship continues, and in the beginning there is what's called a lot of passion and deep passion and excitement, and then over time that these personality traits start to sort of show themselves and the conflict starts to arise. And what happens here is that the individual with borderline personality disorder sort of changes from those initial traits to sort of exposing themselves for this sense of internal emptiness that they have, this intense fear of abandonment, this inherent distrust, so they're always distrustful of the other individual, a lot of neediness, there tends to be a lot of chaos that is created. And your individual that has the narcissistic personality disorder, individual or traits, that they tend to be very self-absorbed. This sense of self-importance starts to come out, but your borderline personality individual needs all that attention, but that self-absorbed individual is not giving it. Maybe they're withholding, so it becomes more and more chaotic, more and more destructive to the self and the relationship, and that narcissistic individual also starts to show this lack of tolerance. Whereas before they seemed very patient and confident, now there's this lack of tolerance. So this high degree of frustration, and because they want their needs to get met way before their partner's needs. And that individual on the borderline spectrum, that they have these intensive needs that also need to be met, but sometimes they get this sense of, I don't want to say fulfillment or satisfaction, but that underlying expectation that they're going to be abused, and that narcissistic individual tends to be overly abusive and aggressive. And that last part is this passion and generosity, really about how you made them feel about themselves. That sort of starts to degrade. The narcissistic personality disorder individual starts to demean the other, and the borderline personality disorder individual is always trying to be good enough, but doesn't have quite that standard in place, so they can't define it as well as maybe someone who is not along that spectrum. So how do we work with these folks? How do we deal with these folks? Or if you're in this relationship, or you know someone who's in this relationship, what can you do? Well, there's three things that you can do to help the relationship, and those are to engage, to minimize, and stabilize. So let's go through each one of those now. So when we talk about engaging, and what is really the degree of willingness to change, and that could be to change from those borderline or narcissistic maladaptive patterns. It could also be changing the relationship. How willing are you to change the dynamics of the relationship? And also, are you committed to the relationship, to changing, to working on the relationship and making it healthier, learning more adaptive conflict resolution, learning other helpful tips and techniques that you can use to lessen some of that chaos, lessen some of that intensity of the War of the Roses. And lastly, is there knowledge of each other's personality disorders and what those maladaptive patterns are and how this relationship is meeting that need? And that becomes a big problem, because when each other's maladaptive or negative patterns and needs are being met, that only makes that destructive relationship even stronger. So are you willing to give up? Are you willing to engage in something different that could be healthy and open up new pathways for yourself and for the relationship, or even to possibly dissolve the relationship for the betterment of your own mental health? So the next one is to minimize. So can we minimize that core pathological content? Can we lessen sort of these expressive tendencies and behaviors that we often see in individuals that are on the narcissistic spectrum or the borderline spectrum? Can we lessen some of that? And that is getting involved in individual or couples treatment, learning about yourself, gaining some degree of insight as to what sets you off, what ignites. Could be periods of rage or passive-aggressive behavior. What are those things that are causing you to fall into these negative and maladaptive patterns? Also, to minimize, is there reward for harming self or other via the partner? What is the response if there is someone who does self-harm? Are their maladaptive needs getting met? Because if someone is harming themselves, we have to learn particular strategies to prevent that. How can you not harm yourself? What are other ways that you can go about to control that tendency or that urge maybe to harm yourself? And part of that is being compassionate and patient with that individual that does tend to self-mutilate. And that's hard for an individual who is along the narcissistic spectrum, because they tend to have very low frustration tolerance. Self-mutilation tends to be a very self-focused type of act. Not always, but in many cases it is. So that narcissistic individual becomes frustrated because it's not about them. And the individual who is calling out for help, even though it's in an unhealthy way, that self-harm, the narcissistic person is likely to attack them when they do that, because the spotlight is taken away. And what about resistance and defensiveness? So how can we cut down on that resistiveness, that resistance and defensiveness? How would we cut that down? How can we lessen that? Because there tends to be so much of it in the relationship. Can we learn patience? Can we learn tolerance? Can we learn that it's not about winning or losing in the relationship, but it is about making it adaptive and healthy. And sometimes that entails taking a break and not having that tendency to win in an argument, or to make sure that your needs are getting met first and seeing yourself as a priority. And that last aspect would be to stabilize. When we talk about stabilizing, we're talking about helpful behaviors to self and others. What can you do to adaptively and healthily help your partner? How can you do that? So is there a way that you can engage with your partner that really helps them and moves them forward and achieve their goal? And what's that degree of self-sacrifice? It can't be too much self-sacrifice, which is what you typically see in that individual along the borderline spectrum, but it can't be very, very little, where it's only about you, which is what you typically see in that narcissistic personality disordered individual. And next, under stabilize, that comfortability with vulnerability. Can you be vulnerable with your partner? And this is a scary thing for both the narcissistic individual, who is deeply afraid of being hurt, and your borderline personality disorder individual, who is deeply afraid of being abandoned, being left. So these play out in very maladaptive and unhealthy ways. So can you learn to be vulnerable? And that's sort of where therapy comes into play, where a good couples therapist can help, or an individual therapist, about what are appropriate boundaries, what is a healthy way to be vulnerable with your partner, to be vulnerable even during an argument, or be vulnerable when you need something, and how to ask for that in a healthy and appropriate way. And the last area is sort of changing healthy change and healthy challenging and growth. So can you learn to challenge each other in a healthy way and grow from it? Can you both grow? Because you're both going to continue to grow psychologically. You're going to grow certainly how you see the world, and can you grow together? And that's something you really have to ask yourself. Can you grow into this relationship? Because you're going to grow one way or another. So can you grow into this relationship and develop with the relationship? And if not, sometimes some of those hard questions are, is this a relationship that you want to continue, feel you need to continue, or should continue? And to answer those questions, therapy is a really good place to do that, to sort of explore yourself, some of those personality disordered issues as well, and to sort of get a lot of insight and learn about those maladaptive patterns, and then start to learn more adaptive approaches, adaptive and healthy behaviors. Today, I hope that you found this video particularly helpful, and please leave any comments that you may have. Subscribe to my channel if you're interested, or watch one of my other videos and learn more about personality disorder identification and treatment. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, and have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.